Good morning, everyone, and welcome to SDGC's episode 6 of our Final Fantasy retrospective, in which we are going back over every single one of the mainline Final Fantasy games and talking about what we love, what we don't love, and just everything regarding Final Fantasy. And of course, this is episode 6, so we will be talking about Final Fantasy 6. And just to go over the rules once more, again, these are Final Fantasies 1 through 15. We are not talking about offshoots. We're not talking about tactics. We're not talking about any of the Saga Frontier games, which can be considered Final Fantasy offshoots. We're not talking about any of the mobile games. We're not talking about sequels like Final Fantasy X-2 or Final Fantasy 13-2. We will discuss those games at some point, but for right now, this is a mainline series discussion only. And for Final Fantasy VI, for this discussion, we have, of course, myself. I'm John, aka at Mr. Megadev on Twitter, and we also have Derek. Derek, hello, good morning.
What's going on? I woke up early to be here.
Yes, you did. It's not that early for me. Well, I forget you work at night, so
Yeah.
And we also have we have Finn. Finn, good morning, my friend.
/ the Nolan Nerdcast. Hello, everybody.
And be sure to throw out your Twitter handles as well. And Rebekah is here for our first. This is her first Final Fantasy discussion with us, Rebekah. This is the only one you've actually beaten, right?
It's the only one I've actually beaten. I'm Duck Valentine on Twitter, and I'm a morning person.
Yes, you are. You've got enough energy for all of us right now, I think. And we have a guest for the next few Final Fantasy retrospectives because we record them all at the same time, at least large chunks of them. So Natalie Flores from RPGSite and also an intern for Paste. Natalie, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Rebekah was super excited to have you on.
I know, and I was really excited to be with Rebekah.
Yes!
You just made Rebekah's entire day.
You seriously have, this is the best way I could have possibly started my day.
So just for everybody out there, I'm still trying to get over a cold. So if I'm sniffling and coughing, I do apologize. There's no way to edit that out, right, Derek? We can't edit out my sickness, right? Like, we can't.
I might be able to mute some parts of it, depending. Or that.
All right, edit that out. All right, so guys, Final Fantasy VI, released in 1994. The first of the Super Nintendo. No, I'm sorry, the third of the, or it was the second. The third,
4, 5, 6.
Second we got.
I had my generations mixed up. The last of the Super Nintendo generation Final Fantasies, and roundly considered by, I would say, at least the vast majority of the Final Fantasy community to be either the best or in the top 3, I would say. Of course, it is my favorite Final Fantasy. It's my favorite game of all time. I consider it a perfect game. Which is a big claim, I know, and nothing on earth is truly perfect. I have said multiple times that part of the reason we love the things we do is not so much the thing itself, but the circumstances in our lives. When we encountered that thing, which kind of provides a unique flavor for everybody, not just in games but in life. And so Final Fantasy VI. Now, I'm really glad Rebekah is here because this is the only Final Fantasy that you've actually played through to completion.
You picked a good one.
No, I'm throwing it at you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
so I came into gaming later than the majority of my peers. Like, I'm in my late 20s, but I really didn't start gaming until I was in kind of my early mid-teens, which is a little late for that age group. And so I missed most of the Final Fantasy games as they were coming out. I didn't have a PlayStation or any of the systems that they were on at the time. So every Final Fantasy that I played later than it actually occurred. I played 10, couldn't beat it, played 7, we'll get to that later. But 6, I actually didn't play until last year, I think, at the urging of my friend, because Chrono Trigger is my favorite game of all time, and Final Fantasy 6 is his. And he would not get off my case about Final Fantasy 6 being better than Chrono Trigger, and he's like, you have to play it. And so I finally dug in and played it, and it just, I guess it was a couple years ago because what you said about the circumstances that you play it being really important. I played it right as the election a couple years ago was going on, the presidential election, and I think there are a lot of parallels in something just. It's not the same, but a lot of just something really devastating, actually happening to your country or your world at large, and having to soldier on in spite of that.
So we can all agree that Trump is Gestalt and Stephen Miller is Kefka, right? That's a thing that's gonna be a thing now, right?
Kefka has real hair though, I think. So
He does. Well, yeah. Well, hey, you can always spray it on. Like he does. Like Stephen Miller does. If you come to SDGC, you're gonna get it. It's a trash fire. Natalie, you are a big, as opposed to Rebekah. You've played all the Final Fantasy. Like you're like me and Finn and Derek here.
Yes. I love the series. It's probably my favorite JRPG series. Yeah. And 6 and 9 are the ones that I think are like objectively the best. Like I feel like we all have subjective favorites. 10 is mine, but 6 and 9 are pretty much perfect Final Fantasy games.
Which is interesting. Natalie, that's really interesting because 6 and 9, I think we would all agree are the most similar thematically and aesthetically.
Mm-hmm.
Both heavily based on steampunk and like kind of a mixture of steam powder and iron and medieval stuff. That's really interesting that those type of Final Fantasy seem to resonate more with people than the cyberpunk stuff. Derek, where would you rank Final Fantasy VI in your top in your list of 15? Where would you throw it?
I mean, personally, and I think objectively, it's the best game in the franchise. I believe that there are other games that do individual parts better, maybe. But the thing is, 6 as a total package, no other Final Fantasy game to me comes as close when you look at characters, overall story beats, how well they tell that story, the aesthetic, the gameplay mechanics, the music, right? Like you take this as a whole package. There's no game that does all of those things as well as Final Fantasy VI does in its totality. And I think that, when you look at it, okay, maybe Final Fantasy VI isn't every single person's top or favorite Final Fantasy, but I don't think I've ever seen like a list to be taken seriously that has Final Fantasy VI outside of the top 3.
I've never seen that.
It's pretty universal, and that's rare because Final Fantasy rankings are a trash fire. So
true.
Like for Final Fantasy VI to get so much universal respect, no matter how weird the list is pretty impressive and should speak for itself.
I'm just glad that we have somebody on here who shares my Final Fantasy 12 opinions, Natalie. That's
Maybe
right.
I can join for that one, and we can have like a trash.
I would be happy for you to join. I'm going to need support for Final Fantasy 12.
Okay. We're gonna do it. We do
it.
And
and Finn, you are like Derek and myself. Final Fantasy VI is at the very top of your list.
That is correct. I grew up playing with them, so I can't even point to it as it's because it's my first Final Fantasy and I grew up with it. Like I believe happens to a lot of people. It was my third Final Fantasy because I lived in America. But it, much like Derek, unlike other games that you might cherish from your childhood, Final Fantasy VI undeniably holds up to this day. I can play it right now and still be blown away at certain moments about just how well polished and put together this game was. And it doesn't hurt that the graphical style aged like just so well.
Chef's kiss.
And that's why we won't talk about the iOS version.
There's no.
I think that's a really good point too, because like I said, I played this 2 years ago, and I'm someone who's really, really picky about older games. Like I find like I hate Ocarina of Time because I didn't play it when it came out, and I know, I'm sorry, but like that's an example of a game that is just so beloved. But I play it and I'm like, this didn't age well. I hate this. But I so thought that I'd feel the same way about Final Fantasy VI, but I don't. Like I loved it so much.
I will actually, just not to get too off topic, but I will agree with you, Rebekah. N64 and PlayStation 1 games did not age as well as Super Nintendo.
Early Polygon games did not graphically age well.
No. Final Fantasy, going back to just why I love this game, I have a very distinct memory I want to just quickly shout out, and how I even came across it. At the time, I didn't own a Super Nintendo. I had borrowed it from a friend who was going on vacation, and I had gotten grounded because I was bad at camp one day. And
bad at camping or bad at camp?
I was bad at camp, so I got grounded.
You're a terrible camper, Finn.
Finn was a bad boy.
Camping.
That's what I thought too.
my parents were at work because I was sick one day, but I was still grounded. And I remember sneaking the Super Nintendo from my friend, plugging it in, playing it, not realizing you had to save. I thought all you had to do was touch the blue thing and it saved. I didn't understand the concept of manual saving. And so I got all the way to Figaro and I was mesmerized. And my parents came home and was like, turn it off, throw it, like hide it. And then I came back. But I wasn't mad. I got to play it all again. Like that's how much at that moment I was like drawn in. I was like, "Ooh, I get to do that whole thing again." Like I'm in. Let's go.
So here's something else we should address, and I want to throw this to Natalie first. Let's talk about characters because Final Fantasy VI has the largest cast of characters in the entire series. I think what 22 characters in the game, from Terra to Strago. Maybe it's 18. It's between 18 and 22. I can't remember how many, but there's a lot.
It's not 22.
No, that seems excessive.
Maybe it's 18.
Final Fantasy VI was excessive.
It's the
Like,
largest cast.
yeah,
for sure.
it is by far the largest cast in the
by a
entire
pretty wide
series.
mile.
And I want to throw it to Natalie first. Natalie, which characters resonated with you the most in Final Fantasy VI? Which had the strongest arc, I guess?
I know that tarot was really big for me. I wrote a piece on RPGSite about how I played Final Fantasy VI. I was also a bit late to it, so I played it when I was like 12 or 13 or so. But for women, like a lot of the media that we consume defines love as just this romance between a man and a woman. And so playing the game, there's the whole theme of Tara trying to find out who she is, what her identity means in this world, what's her place in this world. And part of it has to do with the fact that she doesn't know what love is, and she wants to find out what love is. And the whole game, I feel, misleads you purposely into thinking that she will find someone, a man, to fall in love with, and that will be the defining moment of her relationship and her character. But when she becomes the caretaker of all those children in, I believe, Mobliz is the town?
Mobliz, yeah.
Yeah, that moment where she just awakens to herself and her character arc comes full circle, not because of the love of a male character that she falls in love with, but the love that she has for children. And motherhood is so important in her character arc. That taught me to think about how there are different forms of love. And it's weird that it took that being represented in a video game for me to realize that, for me to think outside of the box. But I did, and so that game was really important to me in that regard, because now that was the start of the wider plethora of relationships and bonds we women can form in the media.
Well, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because it's really interesting, right? Like they fake you out with the Leo thing, like, because I think everybody thought that Terra was going to have her love arc with General Leo, right?
Yeah.
Then he dies. And in the world of Ruin, it finds out that the real love story was between Terra and those children, which was, Natalie, it's interesting because the Final Fantasy VI is a game of firsts. I think like no other game at that point had touched on issues of motherhood and the love that a mother has for her child, and also in Mobliz, also touched on the issues of teen pregnancy for the first time, and which I don't with Dwayne and Katarine. Which I don't think had ever been done in a game before as well. And as soon as you said Terra, Natalie, I was like, she's going to talk about the kids. I knew that's where you were going. That's fantastic.
Well, going off of what John said about firsts, like I remember this game being the first time so many different themes that up until that point had felt taboo in games, like they just wouldn't touch it. Whether it's a suicide, genocide. I learned what genocide was. Xenophobia, like all these $5 words that I realized I first encountered while playing Final Fantasy VI.
Which is interesting, Finn, because like they touch on all these really deep issues, but at the same time, they were too afraid to use the word holy, so they changed it to pearl in the Woolsey, in the Woolsey translation.
It's like, a weird thing because, and I think it's because they touch on all these themes without ever explicitly stating them. Well, I think that's how it worked.
So as far as favorite
it's
characters
like the
go,
opposite of David Cage.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good way to put it.
As far as favorite characters for me go, and then I want to kick it over to Rebekah. for me, I thought about this for a long time. I really, because everybody, I think, I think every male in a way wants to see themselves as like a Locke type character. You like, that dashing heroic, and I love Locke as a character, but my favorite collector, or my favorite collector, Jesus, my favorite character in the game is actually Celeste, because I grew up with a rather abusive drunk for a father. And things were difficult for me. I didn't have a lot of friends in high school. I was very withdrawn and shut off, and just in a very dark place. I didn't see a whole lot of value in myself or in life or in the people around me. And then when Final Fantasy VI came into my life, I spent a lot of time playing Final Fantasy VI, and that moment where the world is torn apart. Kefka moves the Warring Triad out of alignment, and the world is ripped apart. And Celeste awakens a year later to find herself in this desolated landscape, and none of her friends are around her. I did not know you could keep Sid alive at that point, so he died. And then she walks to the top of a cliff and at least she attempts suicide. She throws herself off the cliff, and my mind was just blown, because Celeste had been like a pillar of strength the entire game, and now when faced with a future of uncertainty and loneliness and despair, she gave in. She lost her internal battle for a moment and looked for the easiest way out. She looked for the path of least resistance. Now, obviously, her suicide attempt didn't work, but I realized that if a strong character like Celeste could fall victim to her own demons, then a weaker person like myself could as well. And I resolved not to be that. I resolved not to be that person. So Celeste really, in a way, motivated me to keep pushing forward. And I've used her as kind of like a model, or like an example for my own struggles ever since going forward. Which is why Celeste is just my absolute favorite character in the entire game, because she reminds me of being alone and feeling like the entire world is against me. And after her suicide attempt failed, she picked herself up, she dusted herself off, and she went on. And she was the one who brought the entire party back together. And that is what I have tried to do with my life ever since.
I think that's a really interesting point that you bring up there too. That they didn't. I mean, those kinds of thoughts, I mean, they can hurt anybody in whatever situation. And I think it would have been very easy to go with a character who had been kind of the sad character the whole game or something, and just like kind of make them like that sort of character and just bring them to that point. But I think it was really interesting in that you hadn't seen anything like that from Celeste up to that point. Just, I mean, to kind of illustrate what you said, that can happen. I mean, you never know.
Well, and I think like the other really interesting part of that, and then I'll kick it over to you, Rebekah, is that they could have very easily gone with a character like Locke for that scenario. You're like, like your male protagonist, but instead they chose Celeste. And so like I really in like years, I didn't think about it then because I was just 14 years old, and my mind I wasn't thinking about this kind of stuff at the time. But now looking back, I really appreciate the fact that they that was a strong female protagonist. That was she was just one more way that Final Fantasy VI was kind of really ahead of its time, in my opinion, not just in themes of gender equality, but also themes of genocide, like Finn pointed out, and there's all kinds of stuff. But yeah, no, what a character, what a great fucking character Celeste is.
That
Rebekah.
was beautiful, John. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank you, Natalie. I appreciate that. Rebekah, let's talk about your favorite character from the game.
So Final Fantasy VI is interesting to me because I loved the game so much, but I don't have a favorite character. There weren't any I thought all of them had really interesting stories. I loved Locke, I loved Sabin, I loved Terra and Celeste for the reason you guys have suggested. But I didn't have one that stuck out to me, and I think that is really important too. Final Fantasy VI is one of the few games I've ever played that has a true ensemble cast. Like, you start out playing as Terra, and so you think in the first hour or two of the game, oh, Terra's the main character, great. And yeah, a lot of the stuff revolves around her, but the cast works together, and it's even at a certain point in the second half of the game, it's even as large or as small as you want it to be. But because of everything that you've gone through with them already, I mean, you can beat the game with just Celeste, Sabin, and I think
Setzer.
Yeah.
You can, yeah.
Yeah, you can just finish up those three. But you're motivated to go find the rest of them. I mean, maybe not the extra characters if you don't know they're there, but everybody that's been with you up to that point, you want to go find them. You want to bring everybody together for this battle. And I'm always impressed with TV shows and movies that can do a really strong ensemble cast, but I've very rarely seen a video game pull that off. And I think the theme that kind of hit me the most just with the group as a whole is that the majority of everyone's story arcs revolve in some way around family, whether that's and a lot of them have to do with having either maybe having no family or having a family by blood that has either rejected you or that you've lost, or something has come between you and them. But it comes together in finding a family in the people who are close to you and the people who are around you, and the family that you choose rather than the family you're born into. And sometimes that is the family you're born into. But I feel like all the storylines kind of revolved around that in some small way. And that was something especially that really resonated with me, especially like back in 2016, as I was kind of, because I have weird things with my family, and I've had to kind of learn that you can choose the people who are going to be your family. And so I loved everybody in equal measure, and
One of these days,
I saved them all.
One of these days, somebody's going to say my favorite character is Umaro. Like one of these days, it's going to be Gogo or Umaro from somebody. Rebekah, that was beautiful. Thank you very much for that.
And I think that's a testament to how amazing this game is and how wonderful the writing is, because it's really easy to make a cast that you can't pick a character that you like the most in because none of them stood out to you.
Yep.
But for none of them to, because you didn't like them, because they weren't interesting, but for none of them to stand out to you because they were all so good, that's really rare. And I think it speaks to
They really are. And they balance their arcs really nicely. I mean, some of them you do have to kind of track down. Like there's some stuff with Shadow that you have to actively seek. But for the most part, everybody has a pretty even time in the spotlight. And that's hard to do.
Yeah.
Derek, what about favorite characters for you?
So for me, and again, like it's an amazing ensemble cast. It's to me, it is Terra and Celis like kind of together, because it's hard because obviously like Terra's kind of your initial main character and stays like kind of the main character throughout, and Celis is broadly, like, despite the fact that Locke you would think would really be your secondary protagonist based on pacing, like he really becomes a tertiary protagonist by the time Celis comes around, as a relatively late addition to the core cast. And what I find interesting is, so there's this dynamic in a lot of media, especially like media for young boys, games, anime, what have you, cartoons, where you have your main character and then you have your kind of not necessarily rival character, but there's always the character who's like a little bit older, a little bit cooler, a little bit more like morally complex on the surface type of character, right? And in a certain way, it's interesting that to me, Terra and Celis like kind of fulfill, because like Celis isn't actually really older than Terra, right? They're both like 17, 18. But Celis definitely codes like older to me in the story. Like she came across, I had to find out later that she was intended to be that young and not much older.
She's a general, so she kind of has
she's kind of this more she codes older. Terra's a very serious character with a very, very serious storyline. She's not the traditional lighthearted protagonist, which is nice to see something kind of break that mold in its own right. But then Celis still gets to be kind of that slightly more serious mirror, and at least on the surface, to bounce off of, compared to Terra being a little bit more blank slate-y at the beginning and kind of coming into herself later. And I love that they kind of both characters break molds. Terra is not a very traditional protagonist. She's a woman instead of a man. She's not like this big, excited, happy, energetic, like positive type of character.
And at the same time, Derek, she's also not the like I don't care.
Yeah. She's very like, she starts very truly blank and comes into herself. And then Celis is kind of like a little bit more traditionally in her role as that like coding older and cooler character. But again, that's usually a male pairing. So to see that be two women was very, very interesting and very, eye-opening. Nat, you said something earlier about how it opened your mind to see, Terra find that love meant, maybe motherhood instead of like romance, and it was like a different type of familial love, and how it's interesting that it took something like this to open your eyes to that. But I think it's actually speaks to the way that media in general really helps. The stuff we consume at a young age is what introduces us to these concepts. You know, I always say that we really benefited from growing up on like the golden age of Disney movies, right, where they were not afraid to kind of hit some heavier subjects. And in that same way, Final Fantasy VI hitting on stuff like suicide, hitting on more complex concepts of love, for me as a young man, hitting on, hey, here's the two biggest characters in the game being women instead of men, you know, that you're not supposed to insert yourself into, but also I still connect with. Like, that's not the sort of thing I was seeing in video games, and that's kind of an eye-opener. And I respect the hell out of that, because it also doesn't make a huge point of it, but it's definitely making a point of it. It was a very, very intentional choice.
I'll say that the romantic subplot was like kind of messy, and it never was like the whole game. I'm yelling, I just want like Locke and Celeste to smooch already, but they don't, and that's fine.
I like it better like that, actually. Like,
it's good to see stuff not
because
be.
I want to root for them, but also I'm like, you know, this was a good choice.
Yeah, it's because sometimes it's not that clean, you know, and like that's good. It's like Terra not ending up with a man at the end. Like, you know what? Sometimes it's not how it works, and sometimes it's not what everybody needs. Like, that's not the end of everyone's emotional arc, and that was a good thing to be hit with, you know.
Well, and you can take that and, you know, what Derek just said, and take it to loop back to, you know, those children that Terra feels, you know, as a surrogate mother for. At the end, when they're escaping Kefka's tower, when it's crumbling, Maduin appears out of his Magicite crystal, and he says, if you can find something that you love to anchor yourself to this world, then maybe you won't disappear, you know. And it ended up being her love for those kids that was able to, you know, like, that's what kept her from fading away with the rest of the Espers, was her love for those children, which is what I thought was really cool.
Speaking of Kefka, we still haven't even gotten a touch on one of the best villains in the entire franchise.
We're gonna get there. We gotta let Finn talk about his character.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, my bad, Finn. I'm sorry.
And after that, we will talk about Kefka.
Of course. So, in the interest of not repeating, I won't discuss Celis, even though she is far and away mine. Fun note, that will be our daughter's middle name, if we actually have a daughter. We have, that has already been.
If you have a son, make his name Ultros.
Can we back up? Ultros is my favorite character. No,
I will go with Edgar.
Edgar.
I love Edgar as a character, whether it's because outwardly, I feel like he can represent a lot of people in the sense that outwardly he's very filled with bravado and almost an arrogance, but inside he's filled with doubt.
Yeah, he is. Yep.
He wants what's best for his friends, even if he can't project that outright. He struggles with whether he or not he's made his father proud. Like, who can't relate to, like, wondering, have you lived up to your parents' expectations? His relationship with his brother, I think, is one of the more understated relationships in the game, where most people would just look like, oh, you cheated to become king, but that is not what went down at all. That's not why he used the trick coin. Everything about his character I loved, even though I loved Celis more. It was a close second for me, and I'm trying to divorce the fact from that he's my favorite character in game to use, because I love his tool set.
Oh my god,
tools
yes.
Are awesome. Yeah,
So
the chainsaw
unique.
is overpowered.
It's ridiculous.
That has I'm not touching that part. And I like just that opening moment when you get to Figaro, and he's just this smarmy king that keeps hitting on Terra for no reason, and then his first interaction with Kefka, and he's so flippant and nonchalant, and then you realize that he really does care, and he almost cares too much, but his position and his role means that he can't be true to himself all the time. He has to put on that front, and whether or not that's for other people or himself is not ever 100% clear. And I really like that, even that this game, even the characters that could be brushed aside as the joke, like, oh, here's the older lecherous guy that just hits on every woman he sees, like such a trope. But instead of letting that be his character, just like everyone else, there's so many layers that you can uncover, whether directly into the plot or by going into all the side quests. And I love that about this game, is that every character has so many layers. Like, another character, I won't go into him, but Shadow. Like he could have been the most one note character. Like he's just a cool ninja, and that could have been enough for people. But there's so much more to Shadow, Interceptor, like all of that. I could go into it forever, but my answer will be Edgar. Yes.
So Finn, thanks, man. That was great, dude. Of course, so this is what I was looking forward to talking about the most, right? Because this is so this is the character who really, like, Celeste was my favorite character, but this is one of those characters that stuck with me for the rest of the series, right? And we're talking about I love that theme.
Who can do
Where's
the
Kogasu? Can we get a gif of that?
Yeah, but
laugh.
Kefka. Kefka is our
The best Final Fantasy villain.
there's always that eternal debate about who's better, Sephiroth or Kefka, right? I am firmly in the Kefka. The Kefka.
It's
camp.
Kefka.
Sorry.
He doesn't have a reason for being evil. He just is.
But that's
so
good.
good.
But that's like so important, right? Because okay, so there are so many video games where there is a villain who does not have a reason for being evil. They are just set up as the bad guy. But like Final Fantasy VI, like goes like a weird step further, right? Like they kind of like try to frame it as though they're gonna like maybe give him a reason, but the reason is just he's a really just messed up, fucked up person. Like
Yeah.
Like they make it clear that there is no reason for him being this evil, and that was intentional. Like sometimes people are just real messed up.
He just
Yeah.
is.
Well, and I think there's a difference between like a lot of villains in media where they just don't have, where they're just generically evil, versus with Kefka where they make it very clear, like, you can actually put a spotlight on the fact that there's not a reason versus just not bothering to give a reason, right? And that makes a world of difference when you put that kind of focus on, like, no, this dude's just batshit, you know?
Well, what's interesting
Some
about
people
Kefka?
have made a very strong comparison to another clown, very famous clown character, and that's the Joker from Batman.
Yeah.
Where people
I
call
admit,
them crazy.
I read
but
his text
they're
in
not.
Mark Hamill's voice.
They're
So.
very smart. It's just they are psychotic and they love the chaos and the evil. Like they thrive off of that. That is what drives them. But they're not dumb. They're not insane. Like they know what they're doing. They're very focused. They just crave that kind of.
There's a sort of nihilistic, like, you know, none of it fucking matters, so why can't I just have everything, you know?
And they surround him with other evil, like the Emperor. They surround him with other characters that do have clear motivations for their wickedness and who maybe can be reasoned with on some level or another to stop the bad things that they're doing or not, whatever. But they give those characters like strong motivation so you can kind of see where they're coming from. And then in comparison, you have Kefka, who's just.
Well, what's interesting about Kefka in comparison to Final Fantasy villains that preceded him, like Exdeath or Golbez, is that like those villains showed up a couple times during the game, and they had this really heavy, deep theme music, you know, with the organ playing, and they were all wearing dark, forbidding armor. You couldn't see their faces, they had the red eyes peeking out from under the, the darkness of their helm, and they all had big swords, and they were big, dark, evil, bad guy knights, right?
Yeah.
And then you have Kefka, who is just in your face from literally almost the very beginning of the game. He's got this very impish, clownish, almost like just kind of fun little theme song going on, and then he's walking through the desert and he's like, there's sand on my boots, and like when he said that, I was like, there's something up with this guy. And Kefka was the first villain, I think, in the entire medium who honestly, like, he won. Like he wins.
Yeah.
Like halfway through the game he wins. And that, like, so I thought, I don't know about you guys, but the first time I played the game, I thought the floating continent was the final dungeon. I was like, oh, okay, like, here we go.
You're supposed to.
And I was like, here we go. This is it. And then he pushes the Emperor off the floating continent and moves the. And then I was like, there's a whole other fucking game here. And that's the thing, is that what he did, like that text, when you see all the continents breaking apart, it says that day the world changed forever. And he did, like, even though you win at the end, like he rearranged the face of the planet for forever. Like it's never going to go back.
They don't undo the snap. Like that's not how this works. You know,
and then through the power of love and friendship, we healed the land.
No.
Yeah.
And Kefka is interesting in that he starts the game off as a rather weak character. Like and then
I thought he was gonna be like the henchman that I was gonna have to fight like 2 or 3 times, and then before I got to the eventual final boss.
They framed him as like the joke character. He was not to be taken seriously. He was too goofy of a character to ever take seriously. And then with each progressive act, you're like, oh, well, this guy's maniacal.
Yeah.
Well, and you know what I really loved was finally getting to his tower and realizing that it was made up out of the ruins of Vector, the Imperial
Yes.
capital. And he had just basically torn Vector apart and stacked everything on top of each other, and created this tower of garbage. And eventually, Rebekah, we were talking about motivations. Eventually, he did have a motivation, which was just to end all life.
Yeah.
Like he and you saw his genocidal tendencies early on. When he poisoned the entire city of Doma was the
Yep.
first time in a
God.
game that and like Natalie, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was that was my first memory of actual genocide in a video game.
That's the beginning of the game, right? Like it's pretty.
Yeah,
It's
it's
very
like
close to the
early.
beginning. Yeah,
It's-
it's during that part where
Yeah.
they're all on the raft and everybody splits up.
Yeah, I remember being a bit shocked, but it's amazing how the game handles his writing because at one point there, I think it's his famous quote where he goes, "There's a reason oppose rhymes with dispose."
Dispose, yeah.
I love it so much. And so like I knew he just killed off an entire town, but they play around with him and that line is so funny and they show just how kind of I don't know, like insane he is. That I found him really funny and I found myself rooting for him a little. Like I wanted everyone to win in the end, but I was always looking forward to what he would do next.
He's a
And,
terrible
like,
villain that you
yeah.
kind of love to hate, you know.
Oh, yeah.
He's
Yeah.
he's got so much, and that's why, you know, people say, "Oh, is it Sephiroth or Kefka is the best Final Fantasy villain?" And it's like Kefka has so much personality. You love every minute that he's on screen. He breaks so many molds for villains in general, not just Final Fantasy villains. You know,
Sephiroth's just tragic.
yeah.
just a sad
Sephiroth's
freak.
very
Sephiroth was boring.
paint by numbers
So
compared to
We'll get
Kefka's.
into him. Don't worry.
Yeah, we'll get to him, but Kefka's
So-
this very unique, very interesting, like, and very enjoyable villain. Like, he's terrible, he does terrible things, but, you know, at the same time, every time he's on screen, it's enrapturing,
And
you know?
Yeah.
Like,
I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention the fact that he has that entire final boss sequence with, you know, the those representations of Kefka, you know, that almost organic tower that you have to climb before you fight Kefka himself had. I really like. So I grew up Catholic, right? Like, yeah, I'm not a practicing Catholic, but I grew up Catholic, and so I saw all that religious allegory in his final boss fight, you know, where it was almost an inversion of the Holy Trinity. And you know, starting off, as you climb the tower, you have those manifestations of Kefka, especially on the third tier, when it's basically you know, it's like the Virgin Mary, and then Kefka lying in, you know, kind of reclining in front of her. And then, you know, you ascend to the heavens, and then, but instead of you know, like, you know, a divine figure coming down, it's Kefka has taken on a very Luciferian persona. You know, he's like he's basically, you know, I mean, he's the god of magic at that point, and he is now the
original
source.
one-winged angel.
He is now
Yeah.
the source of all the magic in the world. And so I really and Dancing Mad, which is that entire 12-minute
Best
long.
boss
Oh my
theme.
god.
Yeah, like, do yourselves a favor, like today, the Black Mages, which is
it's so good.
Uematsu's
Oh, so good.
band. Natalie, I don't know if you're familiar with the Black Mages.
Yes, I believe they performed. I went to two Distant Worlds concerts and then I went to a Video Games Live concert. I'm not sure if they performed
They-
there. I believe they
Listen to their rendition of Dancing Mad. It is
Yeah, no, yeah, it's
it's
fantastic.
yeah, it's absolutely phenomenal. And like, you know, like in a weird way, Kefka is one of the strongest characters in the game, simply because he really works hard to make you hate him. Like, he really and what is interesting is that there's no monologue at the end when you kill him. There's no
No.
like, you know, no, he's like, you got me, you know, and he just fizzles away into nothing. But and like, I got and maybe I'm reading too deep into it, but I got the impression that he was either way, he was just fine with it, because it's, you know, he won and it's just all chaos, and and he's perfectly okay with it. He's like, whatever, I did what I needed to do. But yeah, like he was almost like what you would get if you took a petulant child and threw him in the body of a mass murdering clown. Like,
And
that's
gave him godlike power.
yeah, that's yeah. Kefka is just an absolutely phenomenal character. So at the end of the day, Final Fantasy VI is just one of those games that was way ahead of its time, and in the sea of JRPGs that came after, I think still still to this day holds up as in my opinion anyway, is the absolute pinnacle of the entire genre.
And you're not wrong. And I think one of the things that helps it stand out, and something that the genre itself falls into so many times, is Final Fantasy VI does not fall into repeating anime tropes like so many JRPGs do. Like none of the story beats play out in a way that, especially in 94, would ever be considered a cliche. Like the game kept subverting itself and the genre so many times, because like you mentioned, like Golbez and other characters, like at no point did the final boss have a dramatic reveal that he was related to one of your family members, or that
they didn't replace Kefka with someone else 2/3 of the way through the game.
Replaced it in the 11th hour by Necron or something. There was so much that just was done superbly throughout that some games still struggle to today. Like, it's really hard now to pick a random JRPG and not have moments where you just cringe at the dialogue. This game, like, even for the younger
some
characters,
RPGs have not aged well.
Like Realm and Gao are like, I guess, the kid characters, and neither of them talk in an insufferable way. But if you don't play, like, even another recent great one like Lost Odyssey, the kid characters in that are just grown in.
For as much as I do love Final Fantasy 13, like every time Hope opens his mouth, I just want to like peel the skin off my face.
Right. Like,
if a brand new, I say this loving the franchise, if a brand new
where kid characters have to be these insufferable little like people. In 6, when you encounter a kid character, they were just a well fleshed out written character. Like, I don't know, man.
So the Final Fantasy VI discussion has gone twice as long as our normal Final Fantasy discussion. So
wait, before you end it,
go ahead.
One sentence. The opera is fucking amazing. We never talked about the opera. It's fucking amazing.
That is my favorite.
The music in this game is fantastic. I loved Terra's overworld theme. When it hit me, I was like, this is fucking Corridors of Time.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, Rebekah, is that, like, I mean, we haven't even touched on the multiple, like, you guys remember the theories about how you could revive General Leo, or you know, like you know, the opera. Oh, okay, I guess that was before your time. But there were all these theories that you could revive, you know, you could revive Leo, or you know, talk about, you know, I mean, just Mog, you know, Mog as a character, or the fact that, you know, almost everybody plays Ultros. Everybody plays through the game thinking that you can't, you know, like not knowing you can save Shadow on the floating continent.
Right. John, I want to say, I know we're running long, but I think we would be remiss if we didn't end by everyone. We opened with everyone's favorite character. How about we end with everyone saying their favorite like moment / scene? Like, what part of the story was everyone's favorite? That way,
I don't want to have like a long discussion about it because we are running.
Yeah, just list them.
We'll just list them. So we'll start with Natalie.
The opera.
That's a good one. Rebekah.
The opera is an easy one, but I think the coin flip scene was, I don't know, it was special.
That's excellent. Derek.
The opera. I mean, yeah.
Finn.
Did you say Finn?
Yes, I said Finn.
Sorry. Okay. The destruction of the world of balance. Just
and I'm
because I can't say opera.
Yeah, and I have 2, which are the opera, and actually I have 3. The opera, the you know the world of ruin, you know, the world being torn apart, and of course Sabin suplexing a train, because that should be everybody's.
We didn't even talk about that. We didn't even talk about how you like split up your party and do all this.
Bitch, I'm motherfucking Sabin.
I mean,
game.
Literally,
this is such a good game.
You could talk about Final Fantasy VI for another hour.
I'm actually going to bring up Final Fantasy VI as a counterpoint to in the 7 show, because there's something that 6 does that gets lost in future games. But in the interest of time, I will hold on to that.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody for staying with us, and we will be back next week with our discussion on Final Fantasy VII. So we will see you guys then.